Welcome, everyone. It's Thursday. We have NFL action tonight. I'm Josh Larky. This is the Dominator. Today, I'm going to be going over some starts and sits. In the starts and the sits, I'll talk about a few players I'm above or below consensus on for week one NFL action. And I will leave you, the good people, with a nice little underdog pick 'em entry. Got 3 picks, try to 6x our money. We keep it simple here on a Thursday. I'm going to be with you each and every Thursday as long as I can keep waking myself up at such an ungodly hour to prepare you, the good people. This is the grind. We love it. We love it. We love it. Let's get right into it. I'm not here to waste your time. I don't want you to waste my time. Let's talk quarterback. I'm going to be starting where I have him, Caleb Williams against the Titans. He's Fantasy Pros consensus quarterback 14. Now, the Titans did add cornerback L'Jarius Sneed this offseason, but it might take a few weeks for this Tennessee secondary to really gel. That's often how we see it. And I think fantasy managers out there, they're probably worried. Like, why would Caleb be quarterback 14? I think they're worried because Caleb, he's a rookie in his first game. But Caleb Williams is throwing to a historic supporting cast for a first overall pick. I mean, I talked about this on the Player Profiler Draft Show. When Jared Goff was taken first overall by the Rams, what was that like at this point, like 9 years ago? There was nobody on that team currently who had ever played with an 800-yard receiver. Like, there was no 800-yard receiver ever. 0 career seasons on that team of 800-yard receivers. Caleb's going to a team with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen who have combined for like 12 or 13, like suitable or better seasons. And then they just added 9th overall pick Rome Odunze as well. The offensive line is fine. They've got DeAndre Swift in the backfield. They've got Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett at tight end. This is just insane for a first overall pick who usually goes to a dumpster fire team to get what Caleb Williams has gotten. You might be like, Josh, that's great. That just sounds like you're trying to talk up his weapons. No. The betting markets agree. Chicago Bears have the 8th highest implied team total for points scored in the betting markets. Start Caleb. Running back. I will be starting with conviction. Alvin Kamara against the Panthers. Fantasy Pros running back 16. Now, Kamara was the RB3 in fantasy points per game last year. He led all running backs in receptions and receiving yards per game. We know that. But he was outside the top 20 in touchdowns per game and in rushing yards per game. So the key for Kamara to be awesome in fantasy last year was receiving only. That's all we need. The offensive line is injured. We know that Ryan Ramczyk, star tackle, is out. That probably means more Kamara checkdowns anytime Derek Carr's under pressure. The Saints obviously want to win against their division rival. They want to start off 1-0. I think the way to do that is through Kamara because this team right now is just so thin after Chris Olave. Juwan Johnson might not even be 100% still. Rashid Shaheed's been dealing with some stuff. I just don't see why the Saints aren't going to funnel passes to Kamara for this matchup, especially anytime Carr's under pressure. You have to think he's just checking the ball down to Kamara. I'll be checking to make sure that if I have Javonte Williams on my hero and 0 RB teams, that I'm starting him this week at Seattle. Fantasy Pros, running back 24. Year after year, the Seahawks just allow running back dump-offs. Audric Estime, Blake Watson are rookies. They've never played in the NFL. Jaleel McLaughlin rarely saw snap shares over 20% last year. There's no more Samaje Perine. He's now on the Chiefs. I think Javonte Williams could eat into that Perine workload from last year just a little bit. Now that he's another year removed from the ACL injury, the role was actually pretty good last year. He just didn't have a lot of touchdowns. It's Bo Nix's first NFL game. Sean Payton's likely going to dial up a pretty healthy dose of the running backs in this one to take pressure off of Nix. We will be starting Javonte Williams. We're also, for those of you that follow me on Twitter at JLarkyTweets, you would have guessed this one. Been hyping him up all offseason. We're going to start Devin Singletary against the Vikings, running back 28 on Fantasy Pros. Tyrone Tracy's a rookie coming off the high ankle sprain. Eric Gray had just 23 touches all of last year. It's Daniel Jones' first game back from the ACL. I think Singletary is going to be pretty heavily involved in this one. I don't think we should overthink how many touches this guy is getting. RB28, if you went 0, you went hero RB. Singletary, let's just start Singletary this week. And the last one, we're going to go even deeper, because you might be like, Josh, let's get out of the top 30. Get out of the top 30. How about Fantasy Pros running back 32, folks? Mr. Zach Moss against the Patriots. The Bengals are 8.5-point favorites this week, the biggest favorites of week 1. Congratulations, Bengals, for playing the Patriots. Bengals have the seventh most implied points in the betting markets. Moss is the early down and most likely the goal line back. GameScript's going to be in his favor, the biggest favorites of the week. Jamar Chase might be on a snap count in week 1 because he's barely practiced this offseason. This looks like the Zach Moss show to me. I will be starting him in a few of my Hero Zero RB builds. Let's turn to wide receiver. I mean, you probably you knew this one was coming. Everyone's talking about him. We'll get it out of the way, and then we'll talk about a couple other guys. So first, Malik Neighbors, wide receiver 21 against the Vikings on Fantasy Pros. Oh, yeah. We're all starting Neighbors. Yeah. The Vikings are going to blitz. Neighbors gets open early in his routes. The Vikings secondary in general is just one of the NFL's worst as well. The Giants offensive line should more than be able to handle Minnesota's defensive front and pressure. I could see a pretty low average depth of target from Daniel Jones, where he's just handing to Singletary, checking to Singletary, throwing to Neighbors. They're just going to pepper him with targets, try to mitigate the blitz. If there's not as much of a blitz, then maybe we get the more varied role where the Giants win the trenches battle and the Neighbors mixes it up, slot out wide, some double moves. But ultimately, I think he's just going to get a lot of targets. Who else is there? Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton, Jalen Hyatt. At tight end, what is it? Theo Johnson? I mean, my goodness. Get Malik Neighbors 10 targets in this game. And get Rashee Rice into your lineups quick. It's Thursday morning. The game is tonight. Rashee Rice, wide receiver 24 against the Ravens on Fantasy Pros. Now, why do I like Rashee Rice so much? Well, there's no Hollywood Brown. He's been ruled out this week. Xavier Worthy is a rookie. He's never played in the NFL before. So Rashee Rice he had a great role last year. I think he gets that role for at least week 1 this year. The Ravens are going to generate a decent amount of pressure. And Rice is the low average depth of target guy. I think Worthy, they might try to dial up a couple deep shots to him, but Rice is really the guy on these early downs. I think Baltimore is going to focus heavily on Travis Kelce. In the conference championship last year, Kelce just feasted 11 catches, 116 yards, and a touchdown. I think the Ravens try to limit him, and I think it opens up Rashee Rice in this one. We got a few more. Chris Godwin. I love these wide receiver starts. Chris Godwin, Fantasy Pros, wide receiver 31 against the Commanders. It's the Commanders. They were the premier pass defense to target last year. Not much has changed. I looked at the depth chart. I looked at the team name. It's still the Commanders. They're still a bottom 3 pass defense, bottom 5 pass defense. Chris Godwin's back in the slot. In the preseason, he was playing in the slot more. Last year, they got him out of the slot. That's why he was terrible in fantasy. He didn't score touchdowns, and he was outside where he doesn't win as often. I think Godwin's just got a good floor and ceiling. Let's start him this week if you have him. I think he's in line for a lot of targets. Tank Dell, the Fantasy Pros wide receiver 32 at the Colts. So he's ranked as a fantasy wide receiver 3. And I don't get it. I mean, yeah, he's the wide receiver 3 on the Texans. It's also the Texans. They're facing the Colts. I don't even know if he's the Texans wide receiver 3. Maybe he's ahead of Diggs. Maybe ahead of Collins. Like we really don't know at this point. But he's the cheapest one. And either way, the Texans have the 4th highest implied team total. Like I said, this Colts secondary, it's just a general liability. High game total in general likely means a lot of touchdowns. Probably a lot of plays are going to be getting off. I'm not sure why you'd start many of the names above Dell this week. I'm starting him in several leagues. You were able to get him oftentimes in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round, depending on the format. It was a beautiful thing. We're starting Tank Dell. And then last, you need a Hail Mary. You want the Zach Moss equivalent at the receiver position. I've just spent this entire episode just trashing rookies. Like, oh, rookie in his first start, not named Caleb Williams, sit him. Oh, Xavier Worthy, will they dial up a deep shot? All right, rookie. It's not all bad. Sometimes we got to make the case for these guys. It's week 1, folks. Some people out there are like, oh, Josh, check the data. There's no data. The 2024 season hasn't started. But I will start in a couple desperation leagues. I will be starting Brian Thomas, Fantasy Pros consensus, wide receiver 45 at the Dolphins. Now, the Jacksonville Jaguars should have a major advantage against Miami in this game when passing. Bradley Chubb has already been ruled out. Jalen Phillips is going to be on a snap count. Their two best pass rushers had season-ending injuries last year for the Dolphins. It's going to be a highly depleted Miami pass rush early in the season for them. So if you need this desperation start, I think Brian Thomas has some big play upside here where Trevor Lawrence is going to have a lot of time to think and relax in the pocket and throw the ball maybe deep to Brian Thomas. The LSU product had 17 touchdowns last year in college as a junior. And if you want to go even deeper, we dig our shovel in, we go a little deeper. You could say the same thing for Gabe Davis. He's the wide receiver 54. I like Brian Thomas better because he's not Gabe Davis. He's probably good at football. But you could also go Gabe Davis for that kind of play. Some cheap little DFS options there as well. Tight end. Dalton Kincaid has the tightest end. He's Fantasy Pros tight end 4. Producers, we should edit that out. It's early in the morning. I don't know what I was saying. So Fantasy Pros consensus tight end 4. He's facing the Cardinals, and you might be like, oh, Josh, like, yeah, of course, we're starting Dalton Kincaid. Woo, he's tight end 4. All right, this is my conviction start of the week. Conviction. Now, the Bills have the highest implied team total of the week. The Cardinals have maybe the worst linebacking group in the NFL. It's perfect. Perfect. Curtis Samuel's banged up. Khalil Shakir might not even be a full-time NFL player. We haven't seen that yet. It's rookie Keon Coleman's first NFL game. We don't know how acclimated he's going to be. I think Dalton Kincaid looks like the fantasy tight end 1 this week. One more tight end. Start him. Dallas Goedert, he faces the Packers. Fantasy Pros tight end 11. The Packers have a weak linebacker group. The Eagles might be more pass heavy. They might be super, super fast-paced with new offensive coordinator Kellen Moore pushing the pace. The Packers offense can push the Eagles too. It's a Brazil game. It might get weird on Friday night. The other advantage is that it's a Friday game. You have a little more info on how your fantasy team's doing going into the main Sunday slate. We will be starting Dallas Goedert in fantasy football for week 1. And we will be playing on Underdog Fantasy. Don't go anywhere, folks. We've got some sits and below consensus players, and I have an Underdog pick-em entry for you. Don't go anywhere. Josh Larky, this is the Dominator.
This episode is made possible by Underdog Fantasy, and Underdog Fantasy is the leader in best ball. When you go to join an Underdog Fantasy best ball draft, it fills very quickly, especially now. It's Best Ball Mania season, baby. Best Ball Mania 5. I can't believe they're at Best Ball Mania 5 already. $15 million in prizes. They're giving out $15 million with $1.5 million to first. Playing in best ball leagues makes you better. It helps train you on player value and strategy. And Underdog offers a lot more than just best ball contests. They offer pick'ems. My new favorite, the golf pick'ems, baseball pick'ems going on throughout the off season. Hit the pick'ems, back to best ball, hit the pick'ems. So use promo code Underworld. Promo code Underworld gets you a 50% deposit bonus up to $250. So they've increased the maximum deposit bonus. It was $100. Now it's up to $125. When you get the Underdog app, use promo code Underworld and go draft your ass off.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Josh Larky. This is the Dominator. We just went over some starts and above consensus players for me this week in fantasy football. Let's now talk about our sits, the below consensus guys. It's time to poke some holes in these infallible players. And then I'll leave you with an Underdog fantasy pick-em entry because that's what I do. All right, quarterback, Dak Prescott. Sit him at the Browns. Fantasy Pros consensus quarterback 15. I think he should be even lower. You shouldn't be starting this guy this week. Cleveland's defensive front's going to overwhelm the Dallas offensive line. It's not as strong. This offensive line's just not as strong as years past. You look at some of the talent that's been shedding. And then really, CeeDee Lamb's the only marquee talent on this offense to throw to. Brandon Cooks, Jake Ferguson, that's a pretty below average 2 and 3 for a pass game. Like what? It's thin there. The running back room, there's nothing to scare the Browns defense either. It looks like your dynasty rosters from like 5 years ago. Ezekiel Elliott, Dalvin Cook. I don't even know if Dalvin Cook's on the active roster, I'll be honest, but that it would be funny if he was. Rico Dowdle supposedly drawing the start at running back. I mean, it's brutal out there for Dak Prescott. I know people are tempted to just start Dak anyway this week. They're like, oh, I drafted him as my quarterback. Guys, you have like Caleb Williams out there. There's waiver wire quarterbacks. I'd even start Trevor Lawrence over him. Like there's a lot of dudes to start over him. The Cowboys, the bettors, the betting markets agree. The bettors, they don't like it. They have the Cowboys as the 5th lowest team total for week 1 as well. Running back, I'm not sitting him, but this is a below consensus. I told you so. Kyron Williams at the Lions, Fantasy Pros consensus running back 8. So I'm still not sure what the touch split looks like with Blake Corum yet. I do know that Detroit Lions have a ferocious defensive front. It could be just tough sledding for Kyron on the ground. The Rams are 3.5-point underdogs. Corum is a much better pass blocker. We know that Kyron graded out as a terrible pass blocker last year. Blake Corum actually led all running backs in bench press reps at the combine. Really, really strong in his chest. This is me. If anyone watching the show live, I'm virtual benching the air, bench pressing. Yeah. So obviously we're still going to be starting Kyron Williams. If you have him, just lower expectations. Another thing I don't like is that his rushing yards props opened in the 60s. They're now in the 50s. So the public is just hammering that they don't like Kyron Williams this week. That's never a good sign either. It's never a good sign to start Ramondre Stevenson at the Bengals. Fantasy Pros running back 22 consensus. I talked about the Bengals earlier from the Zach Moss angle and how the Bengals are 8.5-point favorites, the biggest on the slate. Well, that means conversely, the Patriots, 8.5-point underdogs, the biggest underdogs on the slate. Lowest implied team total by the Vegas bettors as well at only 16 points. Antonio Gibson's not a between the tackles runner. He's probably going to be playing in the passing game. I just don't know what we're going to be missing out on by sitting Ramondre this week. I was just kind of shocked. I was like, oh, running back 22? Huh? We think Ramondre is an RB2 this week in fantasy? No. Little bit surprised there. I mentioned a lot of names earlier in the show that I think I would just straight up start over him and would sleep well at night. Javonte Williams, Devin Singletary, Zach Moss. I'll be sleeping well recommending those guys over Ramondre. Receiver, Brandon Ayuk. He's the consensus wide receiver 25 at the Jets. He's not a must, or versus the Jets, not a must start this week. He barely practiced this summer due to the contract situation. He faces the NFL's best secondary. The game total's quietly only 43.5 points in this one for a reason. I just don't think that we're necessarily missing out on that much. I think there's some potentially better options out there. One more guy to be careful of. This one's a true sit. Calvin Ridley, wide receiver 35 at the Bears as a Fantasy Pros consensus, wide receiver 35. The Bears defense should be really good this year. It was good down the stretch last year. Calvin Ridley's never played with Will Levis before. DeAndre Hopkins will be playing in week 1. He's recovered from his injury. Hopkins has familiarity with Levis. Hopkins had great peripherals last year. He has the chemistry with Levis. I think Ridley's maybe the team's wide receiver 2 this season. He's ranked well above Hopkins. I just don't know if I believe that. I think Ridley's got a pretty terrifyingly low floor this week. I'm certainly not starting him anywhere. Tight end. Brock Bowers is the Fantasy Pros consensus tight end 12 at the Chargers. I think we can just sit him. The Chargers have a terrible linebacker group, yes, but the Raiders have the 3rd lowest projected team total in the betting markets. Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, there's lots of target competition. He plays with Michael Mayer. I don't know what that split looks like just yet. I just don't see the risk in sitting Bowers. I think if you want a deep dive tight end that you want to swim to the bottom of the barrel and start over Bowers, you can even start consensus tight end 20, but it's Luke Musgrave against a questionable Eagles linebacker unit. I mean, when you look at Underdog pick'ems, they list Bowers at 32.5 receiving yards, and the high-low is 6.45 fantasy points. I just don't think we're missing much with sitting out on Bowers there. So we're checking the chat. Thank you, chat, for chiming in. You made it, folks. It's time for those Underdog pick'ems. One last reminder, I'm Josh Larky. This is the Dominator. You can follow me on Twitter at JLarkyTweets to see what else I'm up to during this football season. I will be with you every Thursday morning, helping you get prepared to win your fantasy leagues. Everyone says that. I believe it. Anyway, I got a pick 3 for you, so we can 6x your money on Underdog Fantasy if this hits. Promo code Underworld. All right, I've got Dak Prescott lower than 17.75 fantasy points. 5th lowest implied team total. As I mentioned earlier, he's just not very mobile. Where do the fantasy points come from? Here's a good one for context. Bryce Young is projected for 12.75 fantasy points. And Carolina's implied team total is within half a point of the Cowboys. I mean, what am I missing here? Dak Prescott projected for basically 18 fantasy points. Yikes. What do we think? He's throwing for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns? Come on, people. Dak Prescott lower, 17.75 fantasy points. Zach Moss, he's back. Higher, 46.5 rushing yards. This is already juiced to the over in the betting markets. The analogs in the betting markets love the higher. They love the over. The Bengals, biggest favorite of the week at 8.5 points. Moss is the early down back. I mentioned before, Chase might not even play a full complement of snaps after his semi-holdout. This is the Zach Moss game. 46.5. He just needs 47 yards. Easy money. Easy. All right, it's not that easy. We're gambling, but I think he's got this. And then last one to complete your 6X entry, if these three picks are correct, Calvin Ridley lower than 10.25 fantasy points. He was lower than that number in 11 of 17 games, which is 65%. Last year with Trevor Lawrence, which means he was higher in only 35% of his games. It's the tough Bears secondary. I mean, Trevor Lawrence is a better quarterback than Will Levis. If you can do it with Lawrence, do you think he's going to suddenly just do it all the time with Levis? Ridley's receiving yards, that's not even listed on the sports books. Underdog's really sticking their neck out and taking a risk by mentioning him. So we got Dak Prescott lower, 17.75 fantasy points. Zach Moss higher, 46.5 rushing yards. Calvin Ridley lower, 10.25 fantasy points. Underdog Fantasy, promo code Underworld, get that 50% deposit match up to $250. I'm Josh Larky. This is the Dominator. This is week 1 NFL action, folks. We ride. We've got our first action tonight. Let's do this. This is what we've been training for. This is what we've been waiting for. Let's have a great season.
From the Podfather to you, I deeply appreciate you tuning in. And many ask, what can I do? What can I do to help support the hosts, the research they do, the production costs? Go to playerprofiler.com, Dynasty Deluxe, World Famous Draft Kit, Rankings, DFS Dominator, and of course, data analysis. Subscribe to any one of those, and you support all of us and take Player Profiler to the moon.